So this session is all about, yay, you got into medical school. So I want to start first with a congratulations to both of you for putting in all of the hard work and having it ultimately pay off with an acceptance to medical school. Samia, what was that like for you when you realized that you got an acceptance to medical school?
Yeah, so it's funny because I wanted to be a doctor for as long as I could remember. But once you get in, I don't think it's a feeling you can prepare for. I was actually at work, working in clinical research. We were in a meeting with one of our sponsors, and I got the call. I asked to step out to go, answer the call because my boss knew I was waiting on that, hopefully. And I spoke to the one of the admissions officers at Baylor, and he was actually from the same area in Texas that I'm from. And it was just, amazing how worlds collide, how things fall into place. And it was just, I guess, sigh of relief is an understatement of a way to put it. But it's a feeling you can't prepare for. And I wish everyone who wants to be a doctor to one day experience that feeling.
Awesome. And I said your name wrong again. Samia, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Lydiah, Jambo, habari yako?
Mzuri sana, habari yako?
Mazuri. So Lydia and I worked together through the application cycle this last time. We love speaking the little Swahili that I know together. Lydia, what was it like for you? This is your third application cycle, if I remember correctly. Yes. What was it like for you to finally get that acceptance?
Like Samia said, it was very relieving. Because for me, the news came at a time when I was going through some personal issues, and I was very sad. And then all of a sudden, I just decided to check my phone, first of all, and I saw the interview invitation. And then shortly after that, I had the interview, and my interview ended at around 4:30 p.m. And the following day in the morning, I got a voicemail from the school admissions counselor telling me that I had been accepted to medical school. Dr. Gray, this was a time that, I don't know, I just felt like, okay, I think I'm getting Lydia back because I had lost her. After going through so many hurdles, both in terms of applying to medical school and in terms of just my personal life. So just getting that news was a sign of relief and light at the end of the tunnel.
What do you think made the difference for you specifically, having been your third application cycle, the difference between not getting in and then finally getting in?
Well, it was a very good time for me. I like to say to look back and connect the dots in my life. Because, when I was going through the application cycles, receiving the rejections, I was confused because it's interesting. The people around me actually were believing in me more than I believed in myself at the time, because I'd gone through so many rejections. And even though I knew I was still going to pursue my dream of becoming a physician, I was getting to that point where I was beginning to give up and starting to think about what else can I do? Because I'd already tried to engage in careers or internship in things that I can be interested in, but I still did not feel like I belonged there. So just getting this acceptance, like I said, connecting the dots, it eventually made sense. Like I was able to make sense of why I had to go through certain experiences to get to that point, because I feel like I've grown. I now know what I'm getting myself into with a better understanding. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm really looking forward into this next chapter of my life.
Yeah. Samia, for you, was it one application cycle and done, or did you have to apply to multiple times?
Sure. Before I answer that, I'm just going to add to what Lydia just mentioned about, dealing with personal issues as you're going through the medical school application cycle. And I think there's a lot of value to that conversation. The title of this session is I Got In, and that's, a feeling that a lot of people, want to get to, but getting there is not easy. And the problem is that, well, the reality is that you're applying to medical school and it takes up a big chunk of your life, but the rest of your life goes on, your family's life is going on, and your friends' lives are going on. And so you're still going to be dealing with issues. And I can relate to what you said, Lydia. Like, I was dealing through my own highs and lows with things aside from medical school. And the medical school app is such a long process and such a time consuming process that it directly impacts your personal life. So, you know, I have to like just step in here and say, like, taking care of yourself, having a strong support system through it, you know, it may sound cliche, you might hear it all the time, you know, but it's incredibly important because it's not an easy process. But to answer your question, Dr. Gray, this was my first cycle applying. I got lucky. I count my blessings, and this is definitely one of them. I actually had a stump in the road my junior year. I ended up getting really sick, and my Mcat got pushed back. And so when COVID-19 hit, had the deadlines not shifted and had the Mcat specifically not shifted, I would not have been ready to apply this cycle, even though the plan before I got sick was only one gap year after graduating from college. But it's amazing how things work out. And so I guess the point of that is, you know, I got lucky applying only one cycle, but the way I look at life is that there is a plan. And so you just have to be patient and be able to have faith in yourself first and foremost, and have faith in the plan that is set forth for you. And it will happen. And especially with a little help from Mcat, it's definitely possible.
Awesome. Samia, what do you attribute to a successful application cycle? What do you think made medical school like you and want to accept you?
So I think for me, like I said, I always wanted to be a doctor. But going into undergrad, I'm from originally, you know, my name is a little, you know, maybe foreign to some people. My family's originally from Syria.
There's a question.
And so, yes, I'm really Daghestani, from that region of the world. Yes. But my family immigrated to Syria many, many years ago. And so I'm originally Syrian. And so with the Syrian conflict, I went into undergrad making conscious decisions that, you know, the traditional route of pre-med undergrads, you know, doing research, for example, or volunteering at the hospital. Those were things that I had to balance and consciously decide, for example, not to do research in order to pursue you know, work for the Syrian situation. And so I spent a summer in Greece working with Syrian refugees, and not all of it was medical related. My work there was not all related to medicine and the traditional medical application. But I think once I went into the medical school application, and when I was able to show that I was passionate about something that was beyond medicine, it added to my strength as an applicant. And so, again, when you're applying to medical school, you have to realize that you're not just a pre-med student who wants to be a doctor. That's not all you are. You're an individual with a family, with hobbies, with interests. You don't spend your whole day or your whole life thinking about medicine and becoming a doctor. And so showcasing those attributes of your personality humanize you to an admissions officer. And I think that's what has a lot of value. I mean, I talked about my family in my interviews, which, you know, how does that add to the strength of my application? Well, there's a lot of underlying factors that come out when somebody who's family oriented can talk about that. And it is ultimately connected to medicine. So I would encourage people to make those connections and think about those connections when they're applying.
Yeah. Lydia, for you, what was the hardest part of the application cycle?
Mm-hmm. I would say, Dr. Gray, the hardest part is trying to tell my story in an authentic way and not selling myself. You can agree with me. I struggled with that a little bit, because you also want to showcase your strengths, what you can bring to the field of medicine, what you've learned from your experiences, but at the same time, not blowing your own trumpet and selling yourself like a product. So that was my hardest part. But, you know, through talking to my family, talking to professionals like you, Dr. Gray, I was able to have conversations that, you know, help me have a better look at myself and examine myself, reflect on my experiences and come together and put those things. It's interesting that sometimes I would go to bed and then wake up in the middle of the night because something just comes to my mind, and I wake up and I want to write it down, in a way that really shows the authentic me and not really trying to sell myself out there.
Yeah. I'm interested. You mentioned having conversations with your family. What does that look like? What are you asking them? What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. For instance, one particular question that I struggled with, which is very interesting, is like to talk about my adversity, right? So, for somebody who knows me very well, will know that I've gone through so much adversity. I was born and raised in an urban slum in Nairobi, Kenya. It was difficult growing in that environment, going to a boarding school far away from my parents, and then transitioning to come to the US by myself, going through financial difficulties in school, a new culture, all that. So I went through a lot. But it was interesting that I couldn't pinpoint a particular story that I wanted to talk about. So by talking to my elder sister and my brother-in-law, and just having them ask me questions and help me reflect back on my life, then I was able to realize which experiences I would really like to talk about that made an impact to me and informed me or continued to motivate me to pursue the career in medicine.
Yeah. Samia, what about you? What was the hardest part of the application for you?
I have to say the hardest part for me was how long the process is. It's just every time I think back to the amount of time that I put in, the amount of time that I spent waiting, you build up, you submit your primary, and then, for certain schools, you get invited to secondary. So that's a victory in itself. And then slowly the interviews start trickling in. But it's just, you spend, all of my friends who are pre-med, who I talked to, who applied this cycle, we all had that same compulsive refreshing our email phase of just waiting. And then you hear that so-and-so got an interview and it's just like, well, where's mine? What's going on? So I think in that time, I had to try to find ways to keep myself busy. And I think during the COVID-19 pandemic, that became even harder. Initially I worked, but then I'm, being immunocompromised, until I found a job that I felt safe in. That took time. And so for me, the length of the process was the most difficult thing to cope with. And that constant, what if, when. So, and figuring out a way to take it all in and just take it day by day and to keep myself busy in the day to day, aside from thinking about the most concerning thing in my life at that time.
Yeah. Trying to explain the application cycle to someone who doesn't understand it, not involved in medicine at all. They're like, what do you mean it takes over a year to apply to medical school? Yep, that's the process.
Yeah.
So as you were going through that, how much struggle, frustration was there having conversations with friends or family members who didn't understand the process? And it's like, okay, so are you a doctor yet? Or did you get in yet? What's taking so long? How did you handle that, if that was ever an issue?
Right. It definitely was an issue because, you get an interview invite, for example, and you're celebrating, you're crying the tears of joy. Oh my God, I'm almost there. And it really is, it's something to celebrate for sure. I'm not advocating against that. But the problem is after that excitement settles, the nerves start to kick in again because you need to rock that interview. Otherwise, it's probably not going to happen if you can't. So then again, you start thinking and you start asking yourself, how am I going to present the best version of myself? You want to consider all the factors, how not to, be coming off as selling yourself, out, and also trying to stay humble while presenting the best version of yourself. And so then your family and your friends are like, well, yesterday you were celebrating this and now you're upset and stressed and irritable again. What's going on? And so, having understanding people in your life is very helpful, and being able to be patient with them as well. As hard as it is when the pressure is mostly on you, to understand that, my sisters, we were all locked up at the house for COVID-19 throughout my application cycle and throughout my Mcat studying. And so I had to realize that for them, being in that environment with me. Like, obviously I was a high stress environment, and so I had to give and take with them too, and there's value to that. I think the other thing I would say, kind of along the same lines, in terms of the application cycle and how it works, because it's hard to explain how it works, and sometimes there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. When you do have other friends who are applying, it's nice to talk to them because, you know, they understand it all. You get kind of a support system with your group who's applying with you. But at the same time, you want to be careful not to compare, because I think if I had to name the second hardest part of the application cycle, it's comparing myself to other people who have already got in, or to other people who are applying with me. And then you start feeling like, well, maybe if I had not turned down that opportunity 3 years ago, things would be different, and I would have gone in an interview at this school, or I would have gone and accepted at this school. There's no value to that because it's in the past. And, you know, we all studied physics and we all studied for the Mcat, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's finite. And so don't waste your energy comparing yourself to other people. Just try to stay focused on yourself.
Yeah. Put on your blinders and run your own race, as my good friend Oprah says. Lydia, for you, were there any, and this was your third application cycle, so maybe not, but thinking over all of your application cycles, was there anything that you heard or that you thought was common pre-med knowledge that as you went through the process, you're like, that's completely wrong? Why are people talking about that?
Yes, as you asked that question, I thought about two things. So the first one is, well, the common knowledge is when you're writing your essays and preparing for your application, to find people to help you in editing your essays, right? Well, when I went through the second application cycle, I actually worked with two of my friends who have just recently graduated from medical school. And also I reached out to a couple of friends to help me in editing my essays. While that was good, it was a mistake that I made at the time, because what I ended up with my essays or my personal statement was what Dr. Gray, you call in your book, the village statement. So in as much as I wanted people to help me in editing my essays, I ended up being very confused, because it is my story, but when I had so many people helping me read my essays, it's like I wanted to twist it to fit the advices they were giving me. And it was so frustrating. It gave me so much pressure. And I ended up not giving my best. Hence, I didn't even get a single interview during that cycle.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Then the other thing was, like, you have to have 528, 4.0, your statistics and stuff. So my GPA is decent, right? I had a 3.68 while graduating. It's not the best, and it's also not worse. So I wasn't really concerned about that. But my MCAT gave me a very difficult time. For those who are not aware, like, I also took the MCAT 4 times. And all those 4 times, my scores were below 500. So, but hey, at the end of the day, I got it. And that's why I'm here today.
And guess what? Your patients will never ask you about what you got on your MCAT. That is definitely not a problem. So yeah, the village statement is definitely a big problem. I stole that line from Dr. Rafael Rivera, the Dean of Admissions at NYU. When I asked him about the importance of a personal statement, he said most of the personal statements we see nowadays are not good because students are taking too much advice from too many people. And it's a common thing in the business world, in the marketing world, to say, if you try to please everyone, you will please no one. Or if you market to everyone, you market to no one. And that's the same thing with the personal statement. If you're trying to add all the changes that everyone is telling you to do, at the end of the day, you end up with a personal statement that's probably not going to have much impact. So definitely a good idea. Samia, for you, were there any big myths or misconceptions that when you went through this process, you're like, that's not what everyone said it was?
Yeah, I think I already touched on this. I would definitely say the statistics that Lydia mentioned, don't get, they're important, of course, but don't get too caught up in it and don't beat yourself up about it, because if you really want it, it's going to happen for you. I think the other thing though is, there's that traditional pre-med route. And again, like I already touched on this earlier, but the traditional pre-med route, you have to pursue research. Some people even tell you have to get published if you want to apply to medical school. You have to have like 400 hours volunteering at the hospital. You have to have 100 hours of shadowing. And if you want to be, an ENT doctor, you better have really good letter of recommendation from that ENT doctor. All those little things that you read on the Reddit and that you get lost at 2 a.m. in the morning reading on Student Doctor Network. That's where, again, I would recommend that there's so much strength and there's so much like relief in being able to speak to somebody like Dr. Gray or Dr. Scott Wright, who are professionals, because they're going to tell you. And I remember logging onto my call with Dr. Scott Wright and telling him all these things like, I don't have research, what do I do? And so you kind of get paralyzed and caught up in what you don't have when you really have a lot to show for. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions I have. If you don't check off all the boxes, obviously you want to hit some of them, but if you don't check them all off, you can still get into medical school and you can still become a great doctor. Yeah.
Love it. For both of you, one of the questions here is, what websites or resources did you use for your personal statement? And I have a good suggestion. Lydia, let's start with you.
Okay, I have a great suggestion. Dr. Gray's, yes, Pre-Med Book to Medical Personal Statement. I read every single essay on that book, and also the additional essays that Dr. Gray provides through a website. Dr. Gray, maybe you can give the link to the Pre-Meds, because for me, like I mentioned before, I really struggled with telling my authentic story without really selling myself. So that book really helped, because Dr. Gray, you talk about like the good thing from those essays and maybe the things to watch out for and not to do. So it was really mind-opening for me.
Yeah. Samia, what about you?
So I actually was not aware of MAPT until I had already been offered an interview. So I missed out on that. But here's what I will say. There are resources online that you can find and people who post, the winning personal statement. And I did read those, and I think in some ways they were helpful. I don't remember the exact links, but if you just look up medical school personal statement, they'll pop up. But what I would say for drawing inspiration, the best inspiration you're going to find is from yourself. So for me, for example, I looked through old pictures of things that I did when I was in undergrad. I spent time looking through old pictures, talking to my sister and I when we volunteered in Greece. She was with me. And so talking to her about our time there and the lessons we learned and how that applies to my future. And if you're a journaler, which at some points I was a very heavy journaler, go through that. And you're going to find valuable stuff in there that is your authentic, truest, and sometimes most vulnerable voice. And if you're willing to share that and put it out there and have an admissions officer read it, then you should, because that's who you are. And I think the last session was touching on this. You don't want to put forth your best self. You want to put forth your truest self. And in my opinion, that's probably going to be your best self. Yeah. So draw an inspiration from you and where you can find it, whether it's pictures, conversations with family and friends, or journals.
Yeah. Journaling. We talk about it all the time. It's a big part of the Mapped app, our software product, of being able to just track everything you're doing and have reflections and little diary entries about everything, including your courses and Mcat scores and activities, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's definitely important. How long do you think it took you start to finish to work on your personal statement, Samia?
Okay, well, I would recommend probably spending a little more time. Again, because of the way my cycle worked out, I ended up deciding to apply end of July, beginning of August, and I submitted my application end of August. And I was also studying for the Mcat. So I put my personal statement together in a 2.5 week span. And so again, I know most people will recommend spending a little more time than that on it. But I think that's what helped me avoid, coming up with a village statement, because most people were not willing to look at it within a 2 week span. So after a lot of begging from my sister, who, I consider to be a better writer than I am, and who would help me, untie the knots that were happening in my writer's block. I think I was able to put together something pretty decent and something pretty authentic. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I will say that, over the years, I would even jot down notes of things I wanted to put in a personal statement for medical school. So maybe I spent several years formulating an idea for it, but actually sitting down from my first draft to my final piece took me about 2.5 weeks.
That's awesome. And Lydia, for you, what was that process like as a reapplicant needing to, or maybe you didn't, well, I know you did for the last one, but the thought process behind rewriting your personal statement and the struggles behind that?
Mm-hmm. So for this third application cycle, I was trying to be very careful not to make the same mistakes I made in my previous application cycles. So I don't know if you remember, Dr. Gray, but my previous personal statement, it was like rewriting my resume in a paragraph form. So yeah. So really, the first time I sent my first draft to Dr. Gray for review was in December of 2019. And I was going to, submit my application during the 2020-2021 application cycle. So from December, I started to seriously think about what I'm going to write. And it took me a long time to write it. And I would agree with Samia, in as much as you might take a short time drafting your essay, it takes a long time thinking about it. Like for me, I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time reading Dr. Gray's PREMED playbook about the personal statement and other essays as well. And the reasons why I would recommend the book, it's because as you read the stories, not to copy, not to compare yourself, like it was mentioned earlier, but you just get inspiration from those stories. Like I remember reading one of the essays and it reminded me of an experience I went through in Kenya, and I included it in my personal statement as well. So I think it took me months to come to the personal statement that I submitted for medical school.
Yeah. And that's not a constant, right? You're not working on it every day for months, but you work on it a little bit, you go away, you come back with fresh eyes, right? So months sounds scary, but in reality, it probably at the end of the day may be similar to the 2.5 weeks, Samia, that you worked on yours. It was just more condensed time.
True. Very true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like for me, like let me mention Dr. Gray, like I would put a pause on it, and then sometimes I'll be resting or sleeping. Then I wake up with this story in my mind. I come down and write and send it to you for reviews.
Nice. Here's an interesting question. I don't know if either of you had something in your applications. Being politically active in the community, advocating for marginalized people, which may be considered, quote, controversial to some, which I don't know why, but that's okay. Can this be held against me? Did either of you have any potentially controversial things in your application you were concerned about?
I did. Yeah, I did. So for me, it had to do, same region actually as the example you asked about. It had to do with my activism, political activism related to Syria. Maybe not as explicitly controversial as Palestine, but still controversial to anybody who knows, a little bit of the details. I was concerned, but actually somebody had given me a piece of advice, which was if the school that's going to hold something like that against you, the school that's going to hold something like that against you is probably not a place you want to be. And even if you feel like, oh, I want to be there because they're a top 10 school, it's probably not a place you're going to be happy if that's something that's going to be a red flag for them. So that's what gave me peace. And that's what it also empowered me to fully embrace, my positions and to what I thought and what I believed after many years of working in that kind of work, what I believed was right. And so somebody out there thought there was value to that. And that's the place that I'm comfortable packing my bags to this July and moving to.
Yeah, I heard that advice from someone several years ago. We were having a conversation at a conference about talking about being part of the LGBT community on an application, and should you hide it, should you not hide it? And that was really the answer at the end of the day is like, if you hide it, because you think that's what's right and you don't want to have anybody's negative bias towards you come out and reject you, and you end up at that school and then you realize that, well, they're not super friendly to the LGBT community.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of your fault for not quote unquote coming out in your application, right? Versus being your true self and saying, here's who I am, take it or leave it. And so you're doing yourself a favor and the schools a favor by making sure that you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you. Love it. Love it. Love it. Talk about the interview process. Sammy, you talked about talking about family and stuff like that. Lydiah, what was the interview process like for you? Was there anything you were concerned about or anything you were surprised about at the end of the day? Obviously, with COVID, it was virtual interviews. But what were your thoughts with the interview process?
So the interview process, I was actually not concerned because for a long time and throughout my previous application cycles, I was praying for, can I please just get that opportunity to interview so they can get to really know who Lydiah is and not through my statistics. So I was concerned they were going to ask me about my Mcat because I'd taken it 4 times and I still had a 499. I did not hit that 500 mark and above. So that was my concern, but to my surprise, and I was impressed as well, it wasn't even a topic of discussion during the interview. Like Samia said, they were more concerned about my story, where I come from, how that informed my decision into deciding to go to a career in medicine. And then a lot of time they focused on the work that I did with empowering the underserved communities through my community-based empowerment program that I co-founded to help individuals who are bright, but they are born to parents who do not speak English because they came here as refugees or do not even understand the higher system of higher education or the job market in the US. So you have these bright students, but they don't have the mentorship or the role models to help them navigate the system in the US. So most of my interviewers were interested into hearing more about that and also about some work that I had been doing to improve the environmental conditions in the slums back home where I grew up. So for me, I found the interviews very conversational, and I was happy that people were interested to really know who I am and what I stand for and the things that I'm passionate about, and not really grilling me about my low statistics or other things that would scare me out. So I was very impressed by the interview.
Yeah, great. Samia, did you have to do Casper? Did you take Casper as part of your process?
Yes.
What was that like for you? The student is asking about Casper here.
Sure. Casper it just feels like, oh gosh, one of those other things that you have to take care of. I actually ended up, I think I watched like 2 YouTube videos about Casper, 10 minutes each. And then after one of my interviews, I don't know, after an Mcat class, I felt a little drained, but I was like, I just have to get this out of the way. And again, I reminded myself that to be authentic and to just, again, like showcase my truest self. And so they kind of have like an MMI feel. I think MMI questions are an accurate representation of the kind of questions they're going to ask on Casper. And you can find like some sample questions online. I did a few and jotted down some notes to prepare myself. But I think Casper, they give you, there's the video format. They put the question or they put the situation usually on the screen, and then they want you to reply. They want you to, say, what would you do if you saw your coworker doing something unethical, or, what would you do if you saw a classmate, having suicidal thoughts, something like that. And they just want you to reply, and they want to see, I think more so than judging your answer, because there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to these situations. They want to see your thought process. And so when you go into that thinking, they want to know how my brain is thinking, you're going to be comfortable in that 2 or 3 minute, I can't remember how long they give you to answer, but in that time span,
5 minutes for 3 questions, I believe.
Okay, there you go. In that time span, you're going to be more comfortable saying, okay, well, my initial thought is this, but actually after reflecting about it, I think this. And so being able to show that you can have a conversation with yourself, to challenge your way of thinking, and then to come up with a final conclusion because I think that's the crux of being a doctor and treating a patient and diagnosing a patient. I think that's what I would say. I would say don't stress too much about the Casper, but definitely approach it knowing that they want to see how you're approaching a situation rather than what your final answer is going to be.
Yeah. Very interesting. Good. Lydia, any other thoughts on Casper?
No, she said it all. I actually didn't put much effort preparing for it. I told myself I'm just going to address this as my authentic self.
Yep, that's all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No need to go spend several $100s on any of the Casper prep programs out there. Lydia, what's your goal for the future? What do you hope to accomplish as a physician?
Good question, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while. While I don't know exactly which specialty I will end up in, I'm thinking of probably emergency medicine or trauma surgery. I'm not sure. However, regardless of the specialty I'll end up in, one thing I know for sure, I'm going to dedicate a lot of time into mission medicine, both locally and globally. And one passion of mine is I want to be able to understand like the challenges that my patient populations have and work with them to come up with solutions to those challenges. That is something I can see myself doing, and probably maybe working with students or residencies once I'm an attending physician.
Beautiful. Love it. Samia, what about you?
So I also actually have an interest in global health, and trying, my goal in the future is to be able to practice both, domestically in the States, where I see myself probably settling down as like a permanent address, but also working globally. Being of Syrian descent, my parents immigrated from Syria, like that's very important to me. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and being involved in that is part of my goal. But I think, and I talked about this in one of my interviews, I think the biggest thing as a future goal for me is to stay grounded as a doctor and to remember that never to come to a point where I see the patient as a number or as a source of income or, as an RVU, that those units that doctors are paid, how doctors are paid.
Yep.
Because I think that's where it becomes dangerous. And that's where you lose. I think most people who are applying and getting into med school share the sentiment of, the patient has to come first. But my goal is to not just feel that now as, with 22 years old, feeling like, okay, yeah, idealizing it and romanticizing it. I hope that in the future, 10, 20, 50 years down the line, that continues to be my number one priority, that the patient, whether the patient is, thousands of miles away from where I am right now or down the street, that patient continues to be an individual with their own story who is shaped by their background, by their family, by their culture, and to always understand that. And I think, having been sick, having gotten severely sick in my junior year and having been on the receiving end of healthcare, I got to learn the value of I saw probably I had a condition that was very difficult to diagnose. It's a very rare autoimmune condition. And so I saw probably 40 doctors that summer when I got sick. And it just, it's miraculous how the ones that were able to diagnose me, the ones that were able to get me to open up about what was going on, even though I was in an altered state because of the way the balance of my brain was completely thrown off. Those were the ones that ended up being able to diagnose me and to treat me and to bring me back completely to a point where I was able to apply and get into med school, which at that point seemed like way out of reach.
Yeah.
So putting the patient first, that's my number one goal. And I hope that it's something I can forever stay grounded in.
Yeah. Samia, finish off here, and then we'll go to Lydia real quick. Final word of wisdom, final just piece of advice that every pre-med should follow.
Again, I already said this, but I feel so strongly about it. Don't compare yourself. Don't beat yourself up thinking about what you should or what you could have done. It's a difficult path, and I really like that analogy of the energy. It's finite. You can only put your energy, you can only spend so many waking hours. The clock is ticking. So use your energy wisely. It's easier said than done. No, I'm the first to admit that, but try not to compare, try to stay to your truest self, and take care of yourself in this process, because it is challenging, and hopefully soon you'll also be able to say that you got in as well.
Lydia?
Yes. For me, I would say if there's one thing you can do as a pre-med, stay true to yourself. I cannot stress that enough. Be authentic. Because, for instance, I'll be going to the University of Missouri Columbia School of Medicine. This was the last school I added to my list of schools. And when I was adding it, I learned about it through the medical school admissions requirement website. While I'd never imagined myself going to Missouri, I read through the website and I was like, I love this school. And when I was submitting my essays, because I had to submit 3 separate applications because I am out of state, and I had to give them reasons why they should take a look at me. And I remember when I was writing my essays for this school, I didn't give it much thought. I was just answering the questions as if I'm talking to my sister or my brother. So I read the question, I write the essays. And this is the school I ended up getting an acceptance less than 24 hours after my interview. And it's the school that is going to train me to become a physician. So stay true to yourself. That's what I can say.
Love it. Love it. Stay true to yourself. Well, if your classmates are anything like you, the future of medicine is in good hands. I appreciate both of you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your thoughts, and good luck to you in the future.